Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Roisin, and I'll be speaking about the opioid crisis in Canada with a particular focus on fentanyl. Really ubiquitous part of what I'm seeing on a daily basis as a registered nurse. It's a public health epidemic. Recently, working in emergency, I had a patient coming in with a diagnosis of seizures secondary to fentanyl overdose. That's all the information that I got to see, and I made a lot of assumptions about what that person was going to look like based on that piece of paper and the type of life that they might have had. In an excellent exercise in humility, all of my assumptions were wrong. Rebecca was a 17-year-old girl who had experimented with drugs for the first time, and unfortunately, her supply was laced with fentanyl. Opioids are medications that bind to receptors in your brain to produce pain-relieving effects. As such, one of their more significant side effects is respiratory suppression. In relation to a common pain reliever, morphine, their strength really is phenomenal. Fentanyl is 100 times the strength of morphine. If we look at baby aspirin, a medication that individuals are on for long periods of time throughout a lot of their life, you can actually split that up into 40 smaller pieces, and just one of those pieces is the lethal dose of fentanyl. To visually represent that for you, you can really see that the lethal dose is so small. So it's the equivalent of 2 milligrams or 2 grains of table salt. I can't imagine measuring that onto a meal with any kind of accuracy, let alone into another medication. This really started in the 1960s when fentanyl was synthesized. In 1996, Purdue Pharma released OxyContin. This was an immediate market success and changed our perception of pain. It was marketed as something that was less addictive and that individuals could take on a regular basis so that nobody had to live with pain anymore. This is when a pain goal of 0 became a goal in society. This is not always realistic. In 2007, the same company settled for $600 million for false marketing to consumers and physicians. And in 2012, as a result, the Canadian market actually pulled this medication off of our market and replaced it with a synthetic version. This is less easy to manipulate, and as such, we really saw a rise in fentanyl to replace OxyContin. And we have had a 300% increase in opioid prescriptions since the 90s alone. There's 2 ways that fentanyl comes onto the market. Legally, it's used as an anesthetic in hospitals, in liquid or patch formed, and originally only market authorized for end-stage cancer pain. Illicitly, it comes in an odorless, white crystallized powder and is sold that way or pressed into counterfeit pills. You can have movement between these 2 systems as patches are obtained via theft and sold on the illicit market. Within our legal stream, we have overprescription leading to highly increased patient dependency on medication. We send patients home on medications, we put them on medications for longer, and on stronger medications. Within the illicit market, because fentanyl is cheaper to manufacture, 75% of other opiates are laced with fentanyl. To talk about production to person, this starts in China, where labs manufacture fentanyl and its analogs and export those to Canada. From that point, there are 2 ways that this can get to your end user. You can actually order fentanyl online with a credit card, because Canadian Border Services require supplier permission to open packages weighing less than 30 grams. The other way that this can get to your end user is through trafficking sold in powder form or as counterfeit pills. Unfortunately, this system looks much the same now in the UK, as several deaths have occurred in the past year as a result of fentanyl being put into the heroin supply. There's a massive financial incentive to maintain this as the status quo. You can purchase a kilogram of fentanyl for $12,500, create 1 million pills, and at $20 a pill, you can make a $20 million profit per kilogram of fentanyl. The scope of the problem is massive. In 2008, about 150 people in Canada died as a result of opiates, and in 2017, that number was over 4,000 people. This is a 2,600% increase in less than a decade, and primarily occurring in individuals aged 30 to 39. So this is killing really young people. Last year, opiates killed more individuals than motor vehicle accidents. 16 people per day ended up in Canadian hospitals as a result of opiate poisoning, and this speaks nothing to data related to individuals treated in emergency and sent home, or by frontline workers. And in 2015, the most recent data available, we wrote 19 million prescriptions for Canada. That's half of our population. The key stakeholders that I identified throughout my research are healthcare providers, frontline workers, NGOs, communities, corporations, and governments. As you can see here, one of our biggest problems is that they're isolated from one another, and not one of them is working together to create meaningful solutions. We also have cyclical leadership. We have governments that come into power for 4 years, They have 4 years to create programs, evaluate their efficacy, and make sure that they are sustained after they're not in power. If these programs are not rolled out across sectors, there's no way to maintain them once that leadership is no longer in power. What solutions do exist? At the global level, in Portugal, which was once Europe's worst country for drug-related deaths, as a result, they've actually decriminalized all drugs. This is not the same thing as legalization, so an individual who is caught with less than a 10-day supply is put in front of a healthcare body instead of a court of law. That healthcare body acts as a publicly funded central agency, which umbrellas all of the services available to that person and decides the best ones for them at that time. These include things like mobile methadone clinics, as well as job training for those people to really integrate back into their communities, and has resulted in a 50% reduction in death rates in Portugal. At the federal level, the Government of Canada has allocated $221 million to combat this crisis. One of our biggest problems right now is we lack real-time data. We don't know what's really happening on the ground, so it's difficult to tailor our solutions. Over 50% of this money will be going to evidence-based treatment, and the rest will equip our border officers, address stigma, and really inform and evaluate our treatment and prevention. Municipally, we do have naloxone kits, over 100,000 of which have been requested in Canada already this year. These act as the antidote to fentanyl. However, they are a Band-Aid solution, dealing with the end result and not the initial cause of this problem. We do have fentanyl test strips, which test for the presence but not the amount of fentanyl. However, they are not commercially licensed. We have safe injection sites where individuals can use under the supervision of medical professionals. That allows faster intervention and more frequent exposure to treatment options available. And we have pharmaceutical recycling programs. So unused medications can go back to the pharmacy to be disposed of effectively. This prevents experimentation and self-medication by perhaps higher risk groups such as youth. I want to go back to my key stakeholders, because what we really need is collaboration between them. Our isolation of our solutions is what's mediating our ability to create these macro-level solutions that really deal with the intricacies of opiate addiction. The gaps and levers of change that I identified throughout my research, within nonprofit organizations, there's a lack of cross-sectoral collaboration. They need to use their expertise to lobby across sectors and create partnerships. Within healthcare, there's a lack of comprehensive treatment programs. We blanket all addiction as the same when it's not. So we need to create those partnerships and educate and train staff as well to question their own assumptions like I made about Rebecca. We have a lack of education and support within communities, so we need to educate communities, especially those that may be disproportionately affected, and meaningfully include them in the conversation that creates the solution. Within governments, I mentioned cyclical leadership, which creates a lack of continuity. We have no policies that maintain themselves past the governments that create them. So we need to be able to upscale those policies and educate across sectors. Pharmaceutical companies have a lack of transparency. So the pharmaceutical companies that create fentanyl are also the ones that create Narcan, its antidote. This is a massive conflict of interest and shows no internal regulation. This is an opportunity for governments and pharmaceutical companies to work together to be at the forefront of the solution rather than contribute to the problem. And lastly, misconceptions may not intuitively seem like a gap. However, the assumptions and the misconceptions we make about people who are struggling with this as a problem really leverage our ability to engage with them at a social level. So we need mental health programming that deals with the cause of this problem in the first place, health promotion, and prevention programs. To talk about individual success for systems change, you have your initial exposure. That's when you have contact with services, and we need that collaboration between all stakeholders to come up with a comprehensive plan. That comprehensive plan needs to continually be looked at and revised so that it can be the best for that person at that time. This will lead to long-term maintenance and individual health. This individual health will trickle back up into the system to maintain that system's change. Now that I've looked at the landscape, I want to just re-highlight the fact that one of the biggest problems with fentanyl is that it's so strong and its potency is so high. I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation my professional interest in this problem. I also have a very personal interest in this problem. When I began my university career, someone who really helped me transition into that and alleviated my anxiety struggled with anxiety himself. One night, to alleviate that, he took OxyContin, and that was laced with fentanyl, and he passed away 5 years ago as a result. This is his sister speaking about him, who says, "I hope to create awareness about this crisis. Fentanyl deaths are happening in regular families just like mine was. And I would like to emphasize was because she's never going to get that regular family back. And this is how she chooses to remember him. Looking forward in a positive way, 100% of deaths as a result of fentanyl overdose are preventable. The UK has a really great opportunity to learn from the mistakes of North America so that this doesn't become the same epidemic. And in Canada in 2017, that could have saved over 4,000 people. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think I probably speak for us as the judges and the audience to say we're staggered at the statistics that you've put in front of us for what is a hugely serious issue that you are tackling on a day-to-day basis. Well done for talking about such a personal issue to you and sharing your personal journey with us. I was staggered by the financial incentive that you had put. That slide was truly staggering. Can you say a little bit about how you try and tackle that, those that are involved and who are financially incentivized by this? Because I imagine that that is a murky area.
It's a very difficult area, I think, to tackle, unfortunately. You have a tension that exists between a publicly funded healthcare system that's competing for resources and that has to unfortunately utilize what they have available to them to compete for those resources. But then you also have a system that allows all of these individuals from different sectors, especially with cross-national regulatory problems, to sort of circumvent the laws that do exist in a way that allows them to maintain this status quo. So I think that tackling it needs to start with education. We have a really good opportunity in pharmaceutical industries and in government to work together to sort of decentivize the financial incentive to keep this going, to increase regulation, and to create educational programs within universities that incentivize pharmaceutical companies to do research in different ways and to be more transparent about that research. And I think that hopefully that would potentially trickle down into other systems and sort of circumvent this in that way. Other than that, I'm not really sure how you could tackle something so huge independently, so that would come through partnerships and collaboration, absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Thanks so much, and also commend you for dealing with some technical failure of not having screen in front of you, so good job on that. You have 2 minutes with Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada. What do you say? What's your message?
I think that my message to Justin Trudeau would be that the first step in Canada right now is potentially looked at as cannabis legalization, and that's not enough. It's a conversation that's happening too late, and it's a conversation that's not really addressing the root causes of these types of problems. So I would say let's get everybody together and put us all in a room together, the people who are experiencing this, but the people who are at the front lines, the nurses and the EMS and the CPS, which are police services, and put us all together and see what we can come up with one another rather than against one another and trying to compete in a way that's not helping anybody.
You mentioned the Portuguese system as a potential way or as a solution, as part of the solution landscape that you might adopt at least some of the modules from. Which of these elements that you mentioned are most important, and how do you think would that play out in the Canadian context?
I think that most importantly right now there's a dichotomy between two things. So we have the people who are coming into this issue, and we really need to prevent it before it becomes a problem for those people. So we need those structures in place to deal with things like mental health and make those conversations okay. But we also have the people who are already experiencing this issue, and really cutting off supply or changing something in that way is not doing them a service. So we need to create those programs as well and deal with the issue in a very multifaceted way. So I think that decriminalization in Portugal worked particularly effectively because of those collaborations across sectors that allowed them to really reintegrate back into their communities and to engage with many people in many different areas in order to help them for long periods of time rather than just in the immediacy.
Great, thank you very much. I think that's all
so
from
much.
us. Thank you.